I spent 11 years behind a John Deere parts counter in the 1990s, and back then, every green machine that came across that counter was built by a man who lived 20 minutes from the dealership. The combine was assembled in East Moline. The tractor came out of Waterloo, Iowa. The cabs were welded in Davenport. When a farmer bought a John Deere, he was buying his neighbor's work, and everybody in that farm town knew it. That was the whole deal. That is what the green paint meant. This past year, John Deere fired more than 2,000 of those workers in Iowa and Illinois, in the same towns that built the company, and started moving their jobs to a new plant in Ramos, Mexico. It did that in a year when it made more than $10 billion in profit, while the man running the company took home $26 million. One of the laid-off workers said the reason out loud to a reporter, in one word: greed. We're going to walk through exactly who Deere let go, where the work went, what the chief executive was paid while it happened, and the one thing Deere says in its own defense that actually holds up. Here is the number that tells the whole story. In 2024 alone, John Deere cut 2,167 jobs at its plants in Iowa and Illinois. Waterloo, Davenport, Dubuque, Moline, East Moline, Ottumwa, one after another. And the layoffs did not stop when the calendar turned. They kept coming through the next year, another 200 here, 140 there, plant by plant, town by town. In the same stretch, Deere announced it was moving the manufacturing of some of its machines to a brand new factory it is building in Mexico. The company that put its name on the American farm, the company whose whole brand is a leaping deer and the color of a cornfield at harvest, decided that the cheapest place to build a John Deere was not America anymore. And the people who found out first were the men who had spent their whole lives building them. Let me say one thing, and then I will not bring it up again. I spent 11 years behind a dealer parts counter before I went back to farming full-time, and I put everything I learned about how to build an operation that does not depend on one company's promises into a manual called the Equipment Freedom Manual. It is at getacheron.com, and the link is in the description and the pinned comment. If you want it, it is there. That is all. Now let me back up and tell you how a company like this ends up firing the people who built it. It does not happen because the machines got worse. John Deere still makes good iron. It happens because somewhere along the way, the people making the decisions stopped being the people who make the tractors. When I stood behind that counter, the plant manager in Waterloo was a Waterloo man. He knew the line workers by name. He knew that when the foundry sneezed, half the town caught cold. The decisions about that plant were made by people who had to live in the same town as the consequences. That is not who runs it now. The decisions about which American plant lives and which one moves to Mexico are made in a boardroom by people who look at a spreadsheet, and on that spreadsheet, a worker in Waterloo and a worker in Ramos are just two numbers with different costs. The Waterloo man costs more. The spreadsheet says, move the work to the cheaper number. It does not matter to that spreadsheet that the Waterloo man's father built combines too, or that his town has no other employer, or that the farmers buying those combines have trusted the green paint precisely because it was his hands that built it. Loyalty does not have a cell on the spreadsheet. Cost does. This is the same pattern this channel has been describing for a year, and it always has the same shape. A great American company earns generations of trust by making the best thing with the best people in the open. Then a finance layer takes over. the kind of executive who has never welded a cab or cleared a fault code or pulled a calf at 2 in the morning. And that layer looks at all that hard-won loyalty and sees it as something to spend. American farmers built John Deere's empire, one purchase at a time, across 100 years and 3 generations of the same families. And then they watched the people in charge decide that the Americans who built it were too expensive to keep. That is the story. Everything else is just the numbers that prove it. If you have been trying to make sense of what happened to a company you trusted, this is it. And subscribe so more farmers see this. Nobody else is telling it straight. So let me lay out exactly what happened, plant by plant, because the scale of it matters. It started quietly. Back in 2022, Deere announced it was moving tractor cab production out of Waterloo, Iowa, the beating heart of the whole operation, down to Mexico. Then the layoffs began in earnest. In October of 2023, 225 workers were cut at the Harvester Works plant in East Moline, where Deere builds combines. Then 34 more at the Cylinder Works in Moline. Then 150 at the Ankeny plant, where they build sprayers and cotton pickers. About 500 more were let go at Waterloo. And in late June of 2024, Deere cut another 610 in a single wave. 280 in East Moline, 230 in Davenport, around 100 in Dubuque. By the end of that year, the count in Iowa and Illinois was 2,167 jobs gone. And it did not stop. In August of the next year, another 238. In September, 141 more, 100 of them in Waterloo alone. At the Ankeny plant, 119 workers out of about 1,500 were let go in a matter of weeks. Meanwhile, the new plant in Ramos, Mexico, kept getting built. When a reporter asked Deere's own regional manager for Mexico whether American politics might stop the project, he said it would move forward regardless. Regardless. That is the word he used for the future of those Iowa jobs. This got big enough that it reached the White House. During the last presidential campaign, Deere's Mexico move drew a threat of a 200% tariff on any John Deere equipment built south of the border and sold back into America. For a moment, it looked like that might stop the whole thing. It did not. The tariff talk moved on to other things, the Mexico plant kept going up, and the Iowa jobs kept leaving. Whatever you think of the politics, the lesson for a farmer is simple. When a company has decided that cheaper labor is the future, a headline does not change its mind. Only losing customers does. Now here is the part that put the word greed in that worker's mouth. In the same period that Deere was handing out these layoff notices, the company reported a profit of more than $10 billion. Its market value sat at around $100 billion. And the man at the top, Chief Executive John May, was paid $26.7 million in a single year. While the line workers in Waterloo were clearing out their lockers, there was a news story that Deere's chief executive had put his 80-acre horse farm up for sale. And I promise you, every one of those laid-off workers read that headline. You do not need an economics degree to understand what a man feels when he loses a job that fed his family for 30 years, in a plant his father worked in, and then reads that the boss who cut him made $26 million and owns a horse farm. That is the feeling this whole story runs on. And do not let anyone tell you this was a company with its back against the wall. Even after Deere lowered its own profit forecast for the year to around $7 billion, $7 billion, it was still one of the most profitable manufacturers in the country. This was not a company fighting to survive. This was a company that was going to clear billions no matter what, choosing to squeeze a few more points out of the margin by moving the work to where labor was cheaper. Nobody in that boardroom was going to miss a meal over this decision. The only people who were the ones on the line. And this is where I will tell you what I know from the other side of it, because I lived in one of these towns. When a John Deere plant sheds 500 jobs, it does not just hit 500 families. I watched what a big layoff did to a farm town once, years ago. The diner that fed the plant shift goes quiet at lunch. The implement dealer who sold to those families sees his floor traffic drop. The high school loses students because families move away to find work. A John Deere plant is not just a factory in these places. It is the reason the town exists. So when that work goes to Mexico, the company is not just moving a production line, it is pulling the foundation out from under the exact communities of farmers and farm families that made it rich in the first place. I saw a town start to hollow out like that, and it does not come back. The building stays, the town does not. This is bigger than one tractor company, and here is why farmers of all people should see it coming from a mile away. This exact movie has already played in every other corner of American manufacturing, and it always ends the same way. Look at Harley-Davidson, an American icon if there ever was one, the sound of the open road, the flag on the tank. It chased cheaper production and cost-cutting, and it spent decades trading on an image its own decisions were quietly hollowing out, and a generation of riders drifted away. Look at what happened in Indiana when Carrier, the furnace company, announced it was moving a plant to Mexico. That one made national news for years because the workers filmed the moment they were told, and the whole country watched a company choose a lower number over the people who built it. Look at Boeing, which traded its engineering soul for a spreadsheet and is still paying for it in ways that make headlines every few months. The pattern never changes. A company earns a mountain of trust by making the best thing with the best people. Then a finance layer decides that trust is a resource to be strip-mined instead of a promise to be kept. They move the work to the cheapest place, they book the savings, and the stock goes up for a while. And then, a few years later, they discover the thing they can never put back. The reason people paid a premium for that brand in the first place was that it stood for something. Take that away, and you are just another company selling a machine, competing on price against rivals who never had your name but now build in the same places you do. And this is the specific reason it is so dangerous for Deere in Deere's own market. A former Deere employee said it plainly to a reporter. Farmers pay a premium for John Deere partly because it was made by American union workers. That was baked into the value. That was part of what the green paint was worth. When you move the build to Mexico to save on labor, you are not just cutting a cost. You are cutting the exact thing that justified the price. You are telling a loyal farm family that has run green for 3 generations that the machine in their shed is now just a machine, built wherever the spreadsheet said, no different from any other except the color and the price tag. And once a farmer stops believing the premium is worth it, you have handed every rival on the lot a reason to win him. One former Deere employee put the stakes better than any analyst. He said, "Nobody wants to see good American jobs shipped to Mexico, least of all the loyal farm families who have bought John Deere for generation after generation, families who often live in the very towns these layoffs are hollowing out." Think about that. The customer and the worker in a lot of these places are the same community. When Deere cuts the worker, it is cutting its own customer's town. That is not a strategy. It is a company eating its own roots. And here is the quiet part of it. Your next John Deere will still show up green and yellow. The nameplate is not going to say "Made in Mexico" in big letters on the hood. The dealer experience will not change overnight. That is exactly why it works. The company is counting on the fact that you cannot see the supply chain shifting under your feet, that as long as the paint is the right color, you will not ask where the machine was actually built or who actually built it. The whole strategy depends on you not looking. So look. So what does a farmer actually do with this? You do not have to burn your green machines or make a decision out of anger, but you can pay attention to where things are actually built, and you can put your money where your values are, whether that means holding on to good older iron that was built by the workers you respected, or looking hard at which brands still build where they say they do. The used market, the old iron, the machines from the years when a John Deere still meant a Waterloo man's work. Those hold their value for a reason, and that reason just got stronger. There is a whole crowd of operators out there right now stripping the computers out of newer machines and rebuilding older ones on purpose, keeping a fleet of iron they can fix themselves and hand to their kids. A year ago, the mainstream called them stubborn. They were not stubborn. They were watching the same thing you are watching now, a few years early, and they decided they would rather own a machine outright than rent a relationship with a company that had already shown them where its loyalty ends. A farmer's dollar is a vote. It always has been, and a lot of farmers are about to start voting differently. Now here is where I keep my promise and tell you where my own story runs ahead of the facts, because there is a version of this floating around that is flat out false, and I am not going to sell it to you. Just this past year, a video went around claiming John Deere was shutting down all its production and fleeing Canada. It got hundreds of thousands of views in 2 days. It was fake. Fact checkers took it apart. John Deere is not shutting down. So let me be careful about what is true. Start with the number that cuts against my own headline. John Deere still runs most of its manufacturing right here in the United States. It still books more than $10 billion in profit. This is not a company fleeing America. It is a company trimming and shifting specific product lines, the skid steers, the track loaders, some of the cab work, to Mexico, while it keeps most of the big iron, the combines, and the high horsepower tractors built in the States and in Germany. And Deere makes a fair point that the farm economy genuinely cratered these last 2 years. Equipment demand really did fall off a cliff. So not every one of those layoffs is a job that sailed to Mexico. Some of it is just a brutal down cycle, and Deere is not the only maker cutting. But do not let the caveat swallow the truth. Deere itself said the job cuts were unrelated to the Mexico move. The workers who got the notices and the union that represents them do not believe that for a second. And neither does a United States Senator who wrote the chief executive a letter about it. The direction is real. The work is leaving. And the reason the whole country reacted, from a Republican senator to a Democratic congressman to the local union hall, is that everybody recognized the oldest story in American business when they saw it. So let me take you back behind that counter one more time. The 1990s. A green combine rolling across the lot, built in East Moline by a man I probably knew, sold to a farmer whose father bought from us too. That was a closed loop. The town built the machine, the farmer bought the machine, and the money stayed in the same 100 miles for 3 generations. Everybody in that loop was on the same side. That loop is what is breaking. When the build moves to Mexico and the profit moves to Wall Street and the chief executive moves his horse farm to the market, the farmer is the only one left standing where he always stood, on his own ground, holding a machine that used to mean his neighbor's work and now just means a color. Deere is betting that the farmer will keep paying the premium out of habit long after the thing the premium paid for is gone. Maybe he will. Deere has a lot of habit banked. But habit is not loyalty, and loyalty is not permanent, and a farmer has a longer memory than any spreadsheet gives him credit for. A farmer ought to know exactly who built what he bought, and exactly where the money went. For the first time in a long time, he is finding out, and he is not going to forget it.